and sullied by us humans, sex is a very good part of human life.
We live our lives in a great deal of hypocrisy, telling our children to do one thing while we do something else.
The quest for control. We all would love it if our lives were a bit more controllable.
Discussions within the Christian community about these questions will be primary for the survival of the Christian community.
I defined it as conceiving from others' gametes and ethical appraisal. That was the retitle. What are we and who are we? What this means to be human? And how do I understand myself humanly and ethically? So ethical self-understanding is crucial. This is the large question looming under the ethical appraisal of gametal donation, what I call JD. It covers both gametes. And this is gametal donation used to conceive the child within marriage. But indeed, this is the large question looming in all the issues that we've been concerned. The millions of people today who live under biblical religion turn for light to answer this question and self-understanding to our original source of truth. The Jewish community calls the first book of the Bible in the beginning. They call it by their first words. And we call it Genesis. And the book begins with, in the beginning, God created heaven and earth. So the material cosmos, nature, and the order of matter in which we exist is God's creation. John Evangelist, as a Jewish writer, he knew very well that the books of the Bible were named by their first words. So he begins his gospel with the same words, in the beginning, deliberately presenting to us the new creation. And in this version of creation, the incarnation of Jesus as the eternal Word of God made flesh, made matter, is the key to understanding what and who we are, and our place in the whole scheme of things, in material creation and in our relationship with God. And in this view of creation, God himself is not only the creator of matter, but he becomes matter himself. He becomes flesh. And I say, out of incomprehensible graciousness, he's to remain matter, bodily, like one of us for eternity. So with Christ becoming bodily, the body takes a divine significance, and only out of graciousness from God, we are not only like Jesus, but we become the dwelling place of the Spirit, or the temples of the Holy Spirit. So at the center of the creation is Christ made flesh, and he becomes our paradigm in our understanding of human nature, understanding of ourselves, and of our understanding God's point of view as given to us in the Bible, as he used to interpret the Bible, or the law and the prophets, as he used to say. Jesus must have done quite a lot of Bible studies and pray about the Bible, because he was recognized as a Bible scholar, if we may put it that way, among the lawyers of the time. And it was the lawyers, and we heard that the other day, who confronted him various times. So in one of the occasions where he was confronted, it was about the meaning of marriage and about the unity of marriage. And if you remember, he answered the lawyer, haven't you read at the beginning that the Creator made them male and female, and they will two become one flesh? So they are no longer two, but one. What God has joined together, let not man separate. And note the principle or the relevance of the flesh, of matter, our bodily condition for unity, for that unity with which we are not to separate or disregard. This theme of matter and bodiliness runs through my presentation. The second confrontation to Jesus was, who is my neighbor? Do you remember? He asked, what must I do in order to gain eternal life? And said, well, you're an expert in the law. You know the law. What does the law say? And he was gracious in that. He didn't put the expert in the law down, but he put him in his place. So he said, love your God with all your heart, with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. But of course, being a lawyer is, but how do we interpret neighbor? What is the meaning of neighbor? It's not so clear. And then he answers that with the story of the Good Samaritan. And with this story, he presents once and for all what I call the intrinsic good and the intrinsic dignity of every human being, whether he's our enemy or our friend. The neighbor is everyone in need, and we are all equal. We have this obligation to care for one another. So based on this biblical understanding, there are three fundamental truths that underlied my presentation as the criteria for ethical appraisal. They could be presented in three words: creation, our unity in marriage, and the dignity of the person. So the first is that there is a natural order, the material created order, that bears God's intention. The second is that there is an order of God's, designed by God in our relations to one another in marriage, and the unity of the flesh. And the third one is that every human being, as bodily and personal, is our neighbor, because it was through that bodiliness that the man needed, to be helped. So I say in the beginning, which is not only historical for us as Christians, but it is the origin, the ontological origin, how we are to understand ourselves. In the beginning is, well, that's where we come from. That is, we come into be, is our genesis. And of course, the book was written for everyone at their own particular time. It's written for us now. So these three ideas in our contemporary culture, secular understanding to share with our own fellow citizens are, as I see them, defended and understood in terms of new movements. The ecological movement respects the integrity of nature and of matter. It has come as a reaction to disintegration, to breaking up, to disrespecting the environment, not to see it wholly. Human rights, in many ways, although incomplete, defends that kind of a dignity of the human person. But in thinking about our presentation, I found that really there's no secular movement that I can think of, but you may think of it, that really enters into our understanding, a Christian understanding or biblical understanding of marriage and the family. We are the only ones, as I see it, that has or are the testimonies and the witness of God's point of view in the world. It has his foothold, so to speak, in the biblical religion and those who are faithful to that message in it. So I think this is crucial for us to take it as a challenge from the Christian and the secular point of view. There are no good philosophies, and the philosophies about the body, marriage, and the family have been almost colonized by different points of view. At the same time, it's encouragement to us that we have this inheritance and we have to work to pass them on. And it's very much connected with what as I told you, relates to my understanding of the challenge of our time. And I have put it because the challenge, really, as we all agree, comes from technology. And if you notice, technology can only deal with matter directly. So knowledge or technology in any way you can think is material. They're material instruments made out of matter. But it also affects matter, changes matter, particularly biological beings, living beings like ourselves. So intervenes in matter, affects matter by breaking up matter. If you're a biologist, we dissect in order to understand the creature. If you're a discoverer of DNA, you have to go into the cell and breaking it up and looking at it from its components. And therefore, it has necessarily to dismantle matter. And then what it does is reorganizes matter in another way. So cloning is the best example we may have. You take an ovum from one cell that is not the original one, you take the nuclei out, you take another nuclei from another embryo, you put it together, you put it now in another context of the animal, and then you get this new whole. But it has done so through reorganizing, breaking up and reorganizing new whole. So it is very interesting if you notice that technology is not holistic. It has to break down, and it reorganizes again. But the challenge from ecology, as we are all aware, comes precisely that the wholeness is not capable of being handled by technology, is the human appreciation, our ordinary experience of the whole, because the whole is invisible, but it depends on it, technology depends on it. Now, this is my introduction. I have 3 parts. I tell you what I'm going to do. I'll present the issues of gametal donation first, as I see them, certain facts, and the ethical appraisal, I am going to do it through what I call 2 ethical windows that I found, I was inspired by it in an ad that I found. And these are anonymity and financial compensation of money that are always involved in the process. And I will then look into the ethical dimension by focusing the ethical implications in the persons involved in the process of gametal donation. So we have the donors, the clinical team, and by the clinical team I mean those technical doctors and staff that take the gametes. Then we have the prospective parents, then we have the children, and then we have society that condones and we all live with it, and how the ethical dimensions are built in the actions of those persons. So presenting the issues. Oh, before that, I want just to set up the context in which I see the gametal donation. Human generation. I'm sorry perhaps to criticize the organizers of the conference. Perhaps they did it deliberately for very good reasons, but I find the word reproduction very inhuman. You see, production is as if we were producing, someone as a conveyor belt, a human being, we are producing a child. And reproduction means almost as a copy. And if you notice the uniqueness of our individuality is really never a reproduction. We are not making a reproduction of a painting. When a painting is reproduced, it's exactly the same as the other one. Cloning would be reproduction if you wanted to live that way. But I find the word generation more human, even for us and for other animals. It comes from coming to be, from genes, from generosity, so that's why I use it. That's that to explain it. And I want to contrast natural and technological in the way natural occurs in the context of male and female, and therefore is sexual, is marital, is integrated in the sense that intimacy, love, sex, and conception are united. They take place in what we are. We are bodily and human. And it's a full human activity. Well, we can't divide it, but in itself, it's full human activity, bodily, emotionally, morally, and spiritually. In technological generation, I mean the generation that is caused by technology and only by technology, it's asexual. So we already have the disintegration. You cannot produce a human being in the totality of what we are, but you have to separate certain things. And the first separation is our intimacy and love from our sexuality or bodiliness relation. It could be extramarital or marital, and then you have the gametal donation, embryo donation, surrogate donation. I am concerned with gametal donation in, therefore, the context of technological generation. And it is a disintegrated activity. And my thesis is that technology requires this kind of separation, even if you put it together. But it really breaks down the unity, the human unity that we find in many aspects. Now, about 2 months ago, as Nigel said, I'm here for 6 months visiting at the University of Chicago, working on medical ethics. And I've been thinking about the paper for a long time, and lo and behold, one day I was waiting for the bus at the University of Chicago, and I found this ad. Gary asked me, "Are you going to put it back?" And I said, "No, I'm not going to put it back because probably there are more of it." And I just copied for you as it comes from here. Is not very neat, but I hope you forgive me that. And I found this ad that gave me, so to speak, some clues as to how to organize our discussion. Healthy women needed excellent compensation. Healthy women 2033 needed to serve as anonymous egg donors. Donors will be required to take medication, blood screening, and undergo minor surgical procedure. Substantial compensation will be given. If interested, call ARR. The telephone number is given. Serious inquiries only. We are interested in all ethnic backgrounds. About 20 years ago, I saw a similar advertisement in London Medical School about male students who were asked to donate their sperm, and there were £7 per sample, about $20. The compensation today has gone up, and I believe in the United States about $200 per sample. Conversing about these matters with a doctoral student in the department where I'm in the University of Chicago, she remarked, "Oh yes, this is a practice in the campus. I know one of the male graduate students in the department who has paid his university studies by regularly donating semen." How many times? How many clinics? Now, I was curious about the substantial compensation there. So I plucked up courage, and I phoned the agency. Obviously, the first question was, "Are you interested in donating eggs?" I said, "I am interested in the substantial compensation." She insisted again, and I insisted again in my question. And then she gave me there was a lady who answered the phone and gave me the straight answer, $3,500. And I asked, "And what does ARR mean?" And she said, "Alternative Reproductive Resources." So I thank her for the information, and I put my receiver down. I couldn't go on with the conversation. I understood all the other bits and pieces. So conceiving children by someone else's sperm, it began in the 50s, and when sperm could be frozen. And then banks were established. And the banks at that stage had three major purposes: eugenic, feminist, and marital. The eugenic intent was most perfectly exemplified in the bank that was opened in California in 1980, designed by Robert Graham, who collected the sperm from Nobel Prize winners. And the sperm was to be made available to women of high IQ. And it is known that William Shockley, Nobel Prize for Physics in 1956, had contributed to this sperm bank. And in 1993, a sperm bank was opened in Oakland, California, by women dedicated to the feminist cause. All women, regardless of race, genetic status, sexual orientation, could avail of the services, including single women. But donated sperm, and now over, are available, certainly in England, for a long time, and supported by the National Health Services, and as you know. And there are now also very many clinics, and in England there are do-it-yourself kits, so that is quite simple. You buy the kits, you get some friend to give you the semen, and you can inseminate yourself. So the process is very simple. It is estimated that in the United States annually, there are about 25,000 to 30,000 children conceived by this method. If my figures are not correct, as many of you are quite involved in these and they're knowledgeable about this, please let me know, or let us know later on. So since 1960 to 1990, if there were 30,000 children every year conceived in that manner, there would be about 1 million children now in the States, only in the States, conceived by this way. This is exactly the same in Europe, and I know it from the countries in Europe. So there will be some millions now children conceived by that manner. IVF made possible to conceive by gametal donation, not only from sperm but also from ova. So ova now, as we see it now there, as our means. Now then the question that ethically is, what vision of ourselves, of human beings, is there inherent in the technological culture and particularly in this practice that is seen as acceptable and commendable? Not in the arguments, of course also in the arguments, but in what we do, the fact that we do these practices. How do the donors, the clinical staff, the prospective parents interpret themselves as human beings and as ethical agents advocating and carrying out these practices? And I think this is the first ethical point I want to make. Although each adult human being is individually responsible for his or her free actions and way of life, as we are a community, our actions are bound with each other's. There would be no gametal donation or donors if there were no one to donate them to. And there would be no gametal donations if doctor and clinical staff did not extract those gametes from the persons. And of course, if there was no knowledge and skill of fertilization. And of course, you may ask, and if there was not a desire for a child. My concern is within marital relationship. So I move now to look at this set of peoples and their the ethical implication in their practice from this point of view, what might say the donor and the parents, the prospective parents. So again, I want to just show you this because it indicates from the point of view of a male graduate. He's just very learnable, very educated person, but he had to pay for a long period to pay his university studies and regularly being a sperm donor. It means that he must have gone to either one clinic or very many clinics, very many times, with the financial, dimension to it. So in looking at this, as you see, I raise this point because it seems to me that it's hard to imagine that healthy women or men at the university would go through the procedure, certainly women, of donating gametes, having to take medication, which is a lot of hormonal intake, to have multiple ovulation, and then to have the surgery, laparoscopy, to take the eggs, if there was no substantial compensation, or if the compensation was abolished. And equally the same for the female the male student. So these are what I say just to emphasize the headings that I will be dealing with. So the donors, how do the donors think themselves? Well, the first point I am making is that they go and they are given substantial compensation. I am not of the opinion that to put selling in a strict sense and buying. First, because the law does not allow the human body to be a chattel or a material commodity that can be sold and bought. The intent to do so is very clear in many areas. Some scientists want to patent DNA, so there are indications that in our culture we want to see the body in a manner that it would be amenable to financial transaction. But at the same time, if anyone goes to a clinic, and I know that more from England than from here, and you want to have a child conceived through gametal donation, particularly from an ova in IVF clinics, you have to pay for the ova, and each ovum in England costs from £1,000 to £2,000 and one trial. So if you multiply, when a woman goes to donate their ova and they go through multiple ovulation, there's a possibility of getting from 15 to 30 ova in one go. So if each ova is sold by $3,000, let's put it that way, the equivalent of £1,000 to £2,000, then the amount of money that the clinic would use or get from that donation would be multiply 3,000 by 100, $300,000. This is to tell you that the business and the marketable and the successful financial setup has to be there in order to be amenable. Now, some people say that this issue about commercialization is the commercial transactions involving sperm, ova, embryo, or fetal tissue are of great concern because of the inherent exploitation of others who would be tempted to sell part of their bodies when they are in great poverty or financial need. But I note that this is a consequentialist argument. It's because they are in need, they will be exploited. But note, this is the manner in which I see it, that preceding this kind of the vision of the body is something that can be really amenable to transaction, to commercialization. It's a kind of a commodity. Well, you may say, is it really? Well, look, the donor enters into the process of technological generation as a contributor of reproductive material, and this is a term used by Christian authors as well, and as an origin of reproductive resource. This resource, in this particular context, the clinic I found, were the gametes. So he or she as a person, as a human being, can remain faceless, anonymous, irrelevant to the procedure, as a name, as having a history. What matters in the procedure is the cell, not the donor as a person. So because the cell is so important, we could anticipate, and I hope it may not happen, but it may happen, that the cells are produced in the laboratory. And therefore, you can go, now suppose that there were a scientific manner of making the ovum and the sperm. Donors would become irrelevant. The cells are made in the laboratory, and you can have a catalog of reproductive resources, and you choose the cells that are, designed to have these features in view of which you have, the child. So the donor, and in the donor, the idea of the parent is reduced to the originator of the cell, the one that makes the cell and can give the cell. So the donor is dissociated from the cell, from the gametes. And therefore what matters is that the child comes from a cell. The connection is not so much that it comes from a parent. Of course, we want to construct that in the new family. And all cells are all equal. And what difference does it make really that it comes from someone else's and from myself? Of course, genetically they are different. We would like to have the connection, but at the end of the day, cells are cells and they are all equal. So the child being born is what is the great good sought for, and the means can be bracketed and silently justified. But they are justified in view of what we understand matter to be. You may ask, and I ask myself, why is anonymity at all here? Why could not the donors reveal their identity? Why can't the prospective parents know the identity of the donors? In my view, anonymity is required because the responsibilities of the consequences of the action of giving gametes are impossible to bear. They have to be bracketed. It's a little connected with the first lecture we had yesterday about taking risks. The principle of anonymity could be translated as, I have to satisfy this desire without no major burden of consequences. So anonymity for me is like the curtain in a play. If you are looking at a play, all that reveals at the front is the finished, attractive scene, what is going on, the family with the child. But it hides all that goes into, and all the persons that goes, and the process that goes into that, making that scene. And if we draw the curtain, we have to see. Our exercise here is to draw the curtain, to make it explicit, so that we have the whole picture, so that we are not partial, so that when we are going to make judgments, we have to see the whole of the reality, not only that reality that interests us in view of course, of which, because it's a good reality, we want to do it. But we, as responsible beings, we have to look at the whole of it. So what are these consequences? I want to mention 3. The donor is allowed by himself or herself, by the clinic, by the medical staff, to be a father or mother of 30 to 50 children, and their gametes used in many, many ways. As the medical team keep minimal records, the accurate knowledge of how many children a single person could be a parent of is not really known. Some people say, "Oh no, it's very well controlled. We guarantee that there will be only 5." Yes, but there is no control as this medical student to how many clinics that student will go, how many samples he will give, where, in what city, and when, as far as I know. These children will be born to different men and women who could have more children by this method or different methods from their own gametes. So the donor can be related to 20 or more adults as co-parent of those children. Each child could have over 20 or 30 half-brothers and sisters in different unrelated families, and permitting the possibility of intermarriages of half-brothers and sisters, and by sheer coincidence, perhaps of full brothers and sisters, because they may come from the same gametal donations. Given this stark reality, put yourself now on the side of the donor. Who could, as a single donor, assume responsibility for any form of relation to 2 different children, 20, whatever number, to 20 different sets of parents as adults? How could anyone want to be known as the genetic father of 20 children in different families? How does our society permit this fact? Only anonymity makes this fact possible. By negating the bond between the genetic parent, the genetic relationship, and the child, the bond does not exist or is of no importance. But materially, it does exist, and it is known to exist. And if it is not acknowledged, our negation will not wipe it away. And as an incidental information, recently John Kilner gave me the opportunity to look at the last issue, 2 weeks last issue of Newsweek, and there was there an ad saying DNA testing. In a number of years, you could test your DNA at home by your computer. There will be kits enabling that. So now DNA is not possible. But if children, as we know from other publications, are interested in finding out their genetic connection, will not go and look up and find out their DNA. I mean, this is only common sense that they will. So if there is no financial compensation, would there be donors? My understanding of human nature would be that there would be some, but very few. And if there was no anonymity, would there be donors? And say, well, some, but very few. In Sweden, I am aware, because I was at a conference in Europe about this issue of anonymity, and Sweden has adopted a law where anonymity is abolished. Confidentiality is returned, of course. So the donor has to reveal his full or her full identity. And the parents have to know that the records for medical reasons and historical reasons are accessible to the child if they were needed, even if the donor may not be known directly. So some countries have adopted this procedure. Now, to whom is anonymity beneficial? Well, at first sight, to the donors, then to the doctors, because there was an illegal problem, and to the prospective parents to a certain extent, because they may convey to the children of the child that they belong to that family without having to make the connection to other people. But really, ethically, and this is my judgment, I want to argue that is not beneficial to anyone, because it betrays the truth and the basic truth, trust that we owe to each other and to ourselves. In front of this curtain, we see the happy parents with their children. But if we draw the curtain, anonymity reveals the following, and I have. It satisfies partial, needy, but not integral desire. By partial, I mean the gametal donation is there because we want a child. This is recognized as a good desire. But it's partial because that desire always has to take place within the context of the other people acting. There have to be donors, there has to be a husband and a wife, there have to be a clinical, and it is not separated. I cannot desire simply to go to the Bahamas and spend whatever £1 million for 6 months and ignore my family or other duties. My desire is a desire with responsibility to all others involved. It induces to live in pretense, encouraging self-deception and deception of others. It encourages, I am the mother, or I am the father, we are the parents. Everyone thinks that we are the parents, but the reality is not that, full reality. It permits abandonment of responsibilities of human, parental, and familial bondings, the donors and the children. Makes agents appear responsible and honorable by remaining anonymous. Very few people would want, whether postgraduate students or young physicians in a hospital, would want publicly and honorably, if it is an altruistic act, to say, you know, I have fathered whatever, 20 number of children. Breaks basic marital and parental and familial bonds and commitments. Relies on given grounds of nature, where the marriage and the family are based, and yet negates, destroys these grounds. I refer to these to the technological paradox, and I'll refer back, but you may ask me later on if I don't make clear, but this is a contradiction inherent in technology. And denies children equal dignity and basic rights and identity roots and bonds, but not making possible for the children to find out in principle their roots. And covers genetic relationships permitting intermarriage of half-brothers and sisters. And it makes money. The clinical team. How much have I time? Well, I have to say something about the clinical team, the parents, and the children. About the clinical team, doctors and scientists have made possible technological generation. The idea didn't come from ordinary people. It began with Archie Edwards, who was a physicist, and he was determined to do it and did it. And it's scientists, as you know, and doctors cooperating with it that make this possible. In this scientific outlook, what I want to emphasize most is that nature and our scientific culture objectifies matter, and objectifies our body is like an object of research. And note the terminology, reproductive resource, reproductive material. So the body is seen under, being a source of reproduction or material. I remember when I was in Europe and the issue of anonymity arose and said, we are going to abolish anonymity. The doctor said, if anonymity is abolished, I will burn all my records. But as a doctor, he was, by his decision, consenting to have patients in the years to come with no accurate medical history. So it is very important to see that doctors are involved in this process in this manner. Now, in my view, what technology has done, the revolutionary novelty is that human generation is not human because it has separated, not so much having sex without having children, which that would be the appeal and what Dr. Nigel said yesterday. And I say this because in natural relationships we could have many occasions where we can have sex without children, even naturally. But the real revolutionary step where everything has absolutely changed is the making of children without sex. The generation of human beings in the lab and scientifically. And this is revolutionary in the sense that technological generation is asexual generation. It's not really a mode of assisting nature. I would resist when they say assisted reproduction. It transforms nature. Why? Because it makes nature do, and it changes nature. It changes the makeup. Nature means matter. It makes the bodily matter, changes it in some manner to make do what of its own powers, of its own structure could not do. Assisting means really enhancing the powers and the structure of nature. But modern technology, and in that sense it's instrumental, really forces nature to do, well, breaks it up, and using the integrity of nature by breaking it up, makes it do what of its own powers, of its own structure, and of its own unity would not do. And this connects whatever we want from the wholeness, because you wouldn't have an ovum or a cell if you didn't have a whole body. But the ovum is taken from the unity in which it emerges, and is now put into a different context, you might say into a different whole. And the technological paradox, which I think it works not only in biomedical context, but it works also in the ecological, is that we use the order of nature to change it, to alter it, to produce what we want, by destroying it. And that's why sustainable development or sustainable progress has emerged. Because you cannot go on disrupting nature, on and breaking its wholeness in order to produce what you want. It has happened in the forest. But in technological generation, what happens, if you notice, is that you have to break up the structure of our generative powers, divided, whether from connection, genetic connection, whether the gestation, whether the parents. And if you destroy that, you're destroying the wholeness of the context. In view of what? In view of creating a family, which the model is the natural model. So in order to have this new whole, we are destroying the natural whole in order to imitate it. And that process really brings us into an unsustainable situation. Now, about the parents, no one would disagree that gametal donation is based on the natural grounds of desiring a child. But the issue here is the relationship of the married couple. How do they understand themselves as married? If the prospective couple, when they went to marriage, said, I take you as my wife or my husband and will remain so if we can have a child or if you give me a child, that would mean that the union is conditional. And the conditional union of marriage is no marriage at all. And that shows also children is not the purpose. Children is a result of the union. The reality of marriage has roots in what and who we are. And by what I mean bodily and who personal beings. Gendered and engendering. So it is through marrying the man that the woman makes him her husband, or the husband makes her his wife. And they make each other spouses. So this is the great truth. Man and woman are made as spouses and petted through one another. They are not made through any other means by just having the child. True fertility is a matter of two, and not of each spouse singly. This is, although you who are medics would know better the grounds of that physiologically, but personally this is very clear. Consent, people would say, well, but if one partner consents, consent is so important, it's an act of will. But the consent still consents to breaking the marriage union as a spousal union. It breaks the union and commitment of being married, being both the spouses and parents through each other. So it's inherent in this technological generation, this kind of separation, it's my view, at every level. What about the impact on children? I finish with this. Well, each one has his or her own story. And that story is not only our bodily story, which is very important. Our story is carried in our body. But as interpretive, as linguistic, as intelligent beings, as historical beings, each one of us has our story. You have asked me, and I have asked many of you, who are you, where you come from? I have to say my story. I am saying who I am. I have not to say that I am a woman because you see it. My presence says that. But you asked me, this is my story. If I had no story, I wouldn't know where I come from. Now, the children deliberately is deprived of part of his or her story by not having that antecedent. Deliberately means that the records are not there available and we don't tell the child. So the genetic origins are part of our story. And to deny them is really to deny part of what and who we are. And in the how the child would interpret, or suppose that the child knew, how would he interpret that he is related to another person who may have 20 brothers or 20 children, and all of these are related in another families, that he's got 20 half-brothers or sisters in another family? How would the child interpret that for his own identity? And would the child think that that was the best possible conditions and context in what he was brought into the world for his own benefit? Now, a final word about society. We have very little legal regulations. I know that in America there are 13 states that have regulated gametal donation. I have not been able to see those. I haven't had the opportunity. But in my judgment, we should secure that the confidential disclosure of full information about donors or anonymity should be removed. This is minimal requirement. And that the rights and responsibilities of donors and the persons on the clinical team, the prospectus parents, and as well as the rights of children conceived by GD or gametal donation as adopted children would be recognized and given. To sum up, it is my judgment that technological forms of generation really dehumanize us. They break us up, they negate and disintegrate, they change the meaning and reality of what and who we are, and they uproot us from our natural grounds. Thank you.